In the waters of the Jordan River, beneath a blazing Mediterranean sky, one of the most profoundly misunderstood moments in human spiritual history took place. The conventional narrative presents Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist as a simple ritual of purification or a symbolic act of humility. But this superficial interpretation is like mistaking the bark for the tree, the map for the territory, the symbol for the transcendent reality it evokes. What truly occurred in that pivotal instant was nothing less than a deep mystical initiation, a transformational gateway between worlds and states of consciousness that marked Jesus of Nazareth's irreversible transition from carpenter to the Christ, bearer of messianic awareness. The canonical Gospels, even in their edited and often diluted form, preserve echoes of this extraordinary event. They describe the heavens opening, the Spirit descending like a dove, and a cosmic voice proclaiming, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." These are not mere poetic metaphors, but coded records of a non-ordinary consciousness experience, a true initiatory death and rebirth that permanently altered Jesus' vibrational frequency and catalyzed his transformation from Galilean craftsman to avataric lightbearer. The Gnostic texts discovered at Nag Hammadi deepen this understanding, particularly the Gospel of Philip, which describes the baptism as a sacrament of resurrection and redemption, and the Apocryphon of John, which reveals significant esoteric dimensions of this transformative moment. These documents, suppressed by the institutional church precisely because they exposed Christianity's deeper initiatory aspects, present the baptism not as an external ritual of cleansing, but as a precise consciousness technology for activating latent potentials within the initiate. In this exploration, you will uncover the hidden dimensions of Jesus' baptism, not as a distant historical event, but as an archetypal model of radical transformation that remains available today. You will recognize how this moment at the Jordan embodied ancient patterns of initiatory death and rebirth, and how these same transformative energies remain accessible to those who understand their inner mechanics. Most crucially, you will learn concrete practices for implementing this transformational model in your own awakening journey. As we immerse ourselves together in these initiatory waters, prepare to transcend superficial understandings and discover the deeper meaning of what really happened when Jesus entered the Jordan as a carpenter and emerged as the Anointed One, a bearer of Christ consciousness that would redefine human potential and establish an archetypal model for transformation that continues to reverberate through the chambers of time, inviting you to your own initiatory rebirth. To grasp the transformative depth of Jesus' initiation at the Jordan, we must first situate it within its complex historical and philosophical context, a vibrant intersection of mystical traditions that created the perfect crucible for this paradigm-shifting event. First-century Palestine was an extraordinary cultural crossroads where multiple esoteric streams converged, forming an alchemical brew for spiritual innovation. Second Temple Judaism of that era was far from monolithic, encompassing diverse initiatory schools, including the Essenes, whose water purification rituals carried transformative meanings far beyond mere ceremonial cleansing. The extensive mikvaot, ritual baths uncovered at Qumran, demonstrate the centrality of water immersion as a consciousness transformation technology. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal that these communities understood immersion as a symbolic death to the former identity and emergence into a new level of being, exactly the pattern we observe in Jesus' initiation. Simultaneously, Hellenistic influences permeated the region, bringing with them the Eleusinian mysteries and other Greek initiatory systems that used ritual immersion to induce altered states of consciousness. The historian Plutarch described the Eleusinian initiations as experiences where the soul tastes death at the moment of initiation, creating a remarkably similar conceptual pattern to what the Gospels depict happening to Jesus at the Jordan. The religious scholar Mircea Eliade documented how these traditions shared a common pattern of symbolic death followed by rebirth into expanded awareness. The same archetype manifested in Jesus' baptism. The Egyptian tradition, still influential at that historical juncture, offered additional parallels through the Osirian rituals in which the initiate symbolically died to be resurrected in alignment with cosmic forces. These initiatory practices significantly influenced the development of the later Gnostic mysteries that preserved more esoteric understandings of Christian baptism. The Nile's waters in the Egyptian tradition, like the Jordans for Jesus, represented both the place of dissolution and the medium of regeneration. John the Baptist himself emerges as particularly fascinating in this context. The historical records of Josephus confirm his existence as an influential spiritual leader, while the Gospels portray him as intensely ascetic, wearing animal skins, subsisting on desert food, and operating outside mainstream religious structures. These characteristics strongly suggest affiliation with esoteric initiatory traditions beyond mainstream Judaism. Scholar Hugh Schonfield convincingly argued that John embodied elements of the Nazarites and Essenes, functioning as a hierophant, an authorized initiator facilitating consciousness transitions. The baptism site itself carries deep symbolic weight. The Jordan River marks the boundary between the desert and the Promised Land. In Jewish myth, a threshold between worlds mirroring the threshold of consciousness that Jesus was crossing. Its name derives from the Hebrew root yarad, meaning to descend or to flow downward, evoking the necessary relinquishment of previous identities and surrender to the transformative process. Geologically, the Jordan is notable for flowing to the lowest point on Earth, the Dead Sea, symbolically embodying the initiatory principle that one must descend fully into the depths before rising to the heights, the death that precedes rebirth. The perennial spiritual tradition recognizes that specific physical geographies can serve as dimensional portals where veils between realities grow thin. The exact location of Jesus' baptism, traditionally identified near Bethany beyond the Jordan, modern-day Al-Magtas, was revered as one such powerful portal, a vortex of energy where consciousness transformations are facilitated. Archaeological excavations at this site have revealed elaborate baptismal structures dating to early Christianity, confirming its importance as a locus of spiritual transformation. Depth psychology offers fascinating perspectives on the water's symbolism as the collective unconscious, the realm of unmanifest possibilities. Carl Jung observed that ritual immersion in water represents a descent into the unconscious and an emergence with enriched integration. In this framework, Jesus' baptism can be viewed as a voluntary submersion into archetypal depths, resulting in the integration of broader aspects of Christ consciousness. Transpersonal psychologist Stanislav Grof identifies parallels between such initiatory rituals and what he calls spiritual emergence, transformational crises that, when navigated skillfully, yield higher levels of integration and functioning. Contemporary quantum physics suggests models for understanding these consciousness transitions, with theorists like David Bohm proposing that reality consists of different orders of existence, the explicate order, manifested, emerging from the implicate order, unmanifested. Through this lens, we can understand Jesus' baptism as facilitating a transformation, enabling greater access to the implicate order for his consciousness, manifesting as expanded capacities and previously inaccessible insights. From this historical and philosophical context emerges a far richer understanding of Jesus' initiation at the Jordan, not as a superficial ritual or mere religious formality, but as a precise consciousness transformation technology, rooted in the deepest initiatory traditions of antiquity and reflecting universal patterns of psycho-spiritual death and regeneration that transcend specific cultures and epochs. At the heart of Jesus' initiation at the Jordan is a 5-stage mystical death and rebirth sequence. Each stage represents not only a historical moment, but a universal principle of consciousness transformation, still available as a spiritual technology for contemporary seekers. The first crucial stage involves what Gnostic texts call kenosis, the voluntary emptying. Even before approaching John for baptism, Jesus had enacted this principle through his desert retreat and distancing from social identifications. The Gospel of Philip, discovered at Nag Hammadi, suggests this emptying went far beyond simple humility. He who was filled emptied himself. He who emptied himself was filled anew. Thus, this passage reveals a sophisticated understanding that deep transformation requires first creating inner space by relinquishing former identities, roles, and self-concepts. The canonical Gospels encode this stage in the apparent paradox of Jesus seeking a baptism of repentance when he seemingly had no sins to confess. This inconsistency resolves when we understand the Greek word for repentance, metanoia, not as remorse, but literally as mind change or beyond ordinary mind. The Jesus who approached the Jordan was deliberately emptying past identifications, creating the void necessary for an expanded consciousness to emerge. Archaeological evidence confirms this practice of kenosis in the form of cave retreats carved near the baptismal site, where initiates reportedly isolated themselves for contemplative preparation before immersion. Religious anthropologist Tina Seelig documents similar preparatory isolation rituals across initiatory traditions throughout history, periods of emptiness that precede consciousness-transforming experiences. The second stage manifests in the moment of physical immersion, katabasis, the deliberate descent. The Gospels describe Jesus going down into the waters, yet the esoteric meaning goes far beyond mere physical movement. This descent represents submersion into the archetypal depths of the psyche, what later Christian mystics would call the dark night of the soul, and what shamanic traditions recognize as a dismemberment of the former identity. The Gospel of Thomas, another Gnostic text, captures this element when Jesus says, "Whoever is near me is near the fire, whoever is far from me is far from the kingdom." This enigmatic statement suggests that closeness to the Christ involves willingness to submit to the transformative fire, the initiatory plunge into waters that dissolve prior identifications. It is no accident that the traditional baptism site sits at the Earth's lowest altitude, 396 meters below sea level, physically embodying the principle that spiritual transformation requires descent into the depths. The third stage involves necrosis, the symbolic death of the limited former identity. The Gospels encode this death in the description of Jesus fully submerged. Primitive baptismal rituals implemented full immersion rather than sprinkling. Paul would later elaborate on this symbolism, describing baptism as burial with Christ. Archaeological evidence of early baptismal pools confirms they were designed for full immersion, some even shaped to resemble a tomb-like structure. Submersion marks what anthropologists call liminality, the transitional phase in rites of passage when the initiate is neither their old self nor yet emerged as the new identity. In this liminal space, the veil between ordinary and non-ordinary consciousness becomes permeable. It is precisely during this necrosis that the Gospels narrate seemingly supernatural events, the heavens opening and the Spirit descending as a dove. Contemporary neurophysiology offers fascinating correlations with this state. Research on sensory deprivation, especially water immersion, documents how such conditions can induce significant brain reorganization, reducing external sensory inputs and allowing emergence of contents normally below the threshold of awareness. Water immersion literally alters the body-brain relationship in ways that facilitate non-ordinary consciousness experiences. The fourth stage represents anabasis, the emergence and ascent. This is not merely a physical surfacing from the waters, but an emergence into a radically expanded state of consciousness and identity. The Gospels describe this phase with the divine voice proclaiming, "This is my beloved Son." The esoteric significance of this declaration goes beyond a special status for Jesus as an individual. It represents recognition of the awakened Christ identity, that realization through initiation. The Gospel of Philip elucidates this understanding, stating, "Those who say they first must die and then resurrect are mistaken. If they do not first receive resurrection during life, when they die, they will receive nothing." This passage reveals the Gnostic insight that true resurrection is not a future post-mortem event, but a consciousness transformation attainable in this life. Exactly what occurred when Jesus emerged from the Jordan's initiatory waters. Anthropological studies document a universal feature of deep initiations. The initiate emerges with a new name or identity. Jesus emerged no longer primarily as Jesus of Nazareth the carpenter, but as the Anointed One, Christ Messiah, a vehicle of expanded consciousness not limited by prior personal identity. It is no coincidence that the Gospels record he began his public ministry and demonstrated extraordinary capacities only after this event. The fifth and final stage manifests as pneumatosis, the infusion and integration of the expanded Spirit. The Gospels describe the Spirit remaining upon him after baptism, indicating not just a momentary experience, but a permanent transformation of his state of being. It is following this initiation that Jesus consistently exhibits extraordinary powers: healing, expanded perception, influence over physical elements, all manifestations of consciousness operating beyond the limits ordinarily perceived as reality. Evidence of this lasting transformation appears in Jesus' subsequent behavior. The Gospels chronicle that immediately after baptism he was driven by the Spirit into the desert, where he fasted for 40 days, a classic integrative initiatory period recognized across spiritual traditions worldwide. During this integration, he confronted and transcended temptations, representing ordinary consciousness limitations, material attachments, egoic power, and tests of physical laws for external validation. Modern transpersonal psychology recognizes similar patterns in spiritual emergence. Individuals undergoing significant consciousness transformations often require integration periods to stabilize and incorporate expanded experiences. Jesus' desert sojourn epitomizes precisely this integrative process. These 5 stages, kenosis, emptying, katabasis, descent, necrosis, symbolic death, anabasis, emergence, ascent, and pneumatosis, infusion, integration, constitute a complete consciousness transformation technology that transcends its historical context. They represent an archetypal model of initiation into expanded states of consciousness, still available and relevant to spiritual seekers today, regardless of specific religious affiliations. Jesus' initiatory journey at the Jordan was never meant to remain a singular historical event, but to stand as a transformative template for all sincere seekers of expanded awareness. Esoteric Christian traditions have long understood that Jesus' transformation provided a roadmap for universal human potential. As Gnostic texts affirm, "Unless you become as I am, you will not know me." Below are contemporary practices derived from this initiatory understanding, each corresponding to a specific stage of the death and rebirth process exemplified at the Jordan. Begin with the intentional emptying practice. corresponding to the kenosis stage of Jesus' initiation. Allocate 3 days for deliberate simplification and release of identifications. On day 1, focus on physical simplification. Minimize intake to simple plant-based meals, remove yourself from overstimulating environments, and reduce technology use. On day 2, implement social emptying. Pause roles and obligations, temporarily relinquish titles and positions, and observe how you identify through relationships and social functions. On day 3, practice mental emptying. Engage in extended silent periods, observe thoughts without identification, and intentionally release limiting beliefs and self-definitions. This sequential practice creates the vacuum necessary for expanded consciousness to emerge, just as Jesus emptied himself of prior identifications before initiation. Neuroscientific research confirms that such stimulus reduction periods foster neurological conditions conducive to significant reconnections and new integrations in the brain. The aquatic descent meditation enacts the katabasis principle of the Jordán initiation. During a bath or immersion in natural water, use guided visualization to symbolically descend into psychic depths. Begin by observing your reflection on the water's surface, symbolizing your conscious self-image. As you submerge, even partially, visualize descending through layers of your psyche, moving beyond the social persona, through personal memories, accessing shared archetypal material, and finally confronting the primordial void where identity dissolves. Stay in this space of non-identity for as long as you can comfortably maintain. This practice is not about inducing shallow, altered states, but about deliberately navigating the deeper psychic terrain that Jesus symbolically entered in the Jordán. It activates what neuroscientists identify as the default mode network, self-referential brain circuits that, when temporarily deactivated, permit experiences of identity beyond the ego. The symbolic dissolution rite corresponds to necrosis, the ritual death Jesus experienced through full submersion. This practice involves a personal ceremony of releasing the old identity to make space for renewed consciousness. Create a symbolic representation of your current boundaries and identifications. This could be a drawing, a letter to yourself, or an object representing your present self-definition. In a location near water, even a small stream suffices. Read or speak your intention to release limiting aspects of identity. Then physically dissolve the symbol, allowing paper to disintegrate in water or submerging the object until it breaks down naturally. Throughout this process, maintain clear awareness that you are releasing not only problematic traits, but positive identifications that still limit your full potential. This implements what transpersonal psychologists call ego death, not elimination of the ego, but experiential recognition of a more fundamental identity beyond limited constructs. The renewed emergence meditation facilitates anabasis, the stage of arising into expanded consciousness. After deep relaxation or entering a meditative state, visualize yourself emerging from initiatory waters in a completely renewed state. Imagine every cell in your body filled with radiant light, not as fantasy, but as recognition of the luminous essence that mystical traditions across cultures affirm as our core nature. As you maintain this expanded awareness, mentally or verbally, complete the affirmation, "I am," allowing surprising conclusions beyond your habitual self-definitions. This practice often evokes profound identity insights beyond prior limitations. Neuroscientific evidence suggests that such contemplative practices can temporarily decrease activity in the lateral prefrontal cortex, a brain region associated with rigid self-boundaries, enabling a more integrated, expansive sense of self. The 40-day integration process enacts the pneumatosis stage of Jesus' initiation, parallel to his 40-day desert fast. This extended practice involves a 40-day commitment to integrating expanded consciousness into daily life. Divide this period into 4 10-day segments, each with a specific focus. The first 10 days emphasize bodily integration, adjusting nutrition, sleep, and movement patterns to support expanded awareness. The second 10 days focus on emotional integration, observing how habitual emotional patterns transform under broader perspective. The third segment addresses mental integration, re-examining fundamental beliefs in light of emerging insights. The final segment emphasizes social integration, carefully considering how to express transformed consciousness in relationships and worldly activities. This structured 40-day container stabilizes changes that often remain transient after peak experiences. Habit formation studies confirm that extended, structured periods are necessary to fully incorporate new neurological and behavioral patterns. These practices require no affiliation to any specific religious tradition. They distill universal transformation principles exemplified in Jesus' initiation, regardless of theological interpretation. They counter the common tendency for transformative experiences to be fleeting when not deliberately grounded through intentional practice. As Mircea Eliade observed, authentic initiations produce ontological change in the initiate, a fundamental shift in way of being that these systematic practices help facilitate and sustain. Contemporary research in neurotheology and contemplative science validates these methods' efficacy. Brain imaging studies document how contemplative practices significantly affect activity in regions associated with self-referential processing and perceptual boundaries. Longitudinal studies show that experienced practitioners develop enduring capacities for states once considered rare or ephemeral. By implementing these practices derived from the initiatory understanding of Jesus' baptism, you engage consciousness technologies that fuse perennial wisdom with contemporary scientific validation. In concluding our exploration of Jesus' initiation at the Jordan, we confront a radically expanded understanding of this pivotal event, not as mere religious ceremony, but as a complete consciousness transformation technology still applicable today. Jesus' journey through initiatory waters reveals far more than a historical biographical episode. It illuminates the potential for radical transformation accessible to any individual willing to follow the same death and rebirth pattern. The Jordan event exposes a fundamental principle often obscured by conventional religious interpretation. Authentic spiritual transformation does not arise primarily from accumulating knowledge, devotional practices, or moral codes, though these have their place. The deepest transformation emerges through willingness to relinquish all previous identifications, to submerge into archetypal depths of being, to experience dissolution of the limited self, and to emerge in a fundamentally renewed state of consciousness. This initiatory insight explains why Jesus chose this particular event to inaugurate his public ministry. The same person who entered the waters as Jesus of Nazareth the carpenter emerged as the Christ, not by external designation or personal achievement, but by direct death and rebirth experience that dissolved personal identity limitations and enabled experiential recognition of his essential nature, which mystical traditions variously name divine consciousness, true self, or Buddha nature. This perspective resolves the apparent paradox of a supposedly divine Jesus requiring initiation. Esoteric Christianity has always understood that the Christ did not spontaneously appear in Jesus at birth, but emerged through multi-stage initiation, with baptism as the critical culmination. He modeled the journey not as exempt from the human process, but as a pioneer exemplifying complete transformation available to all. This understanding invites a substantial reorientation of our own spiritual path. Rather than accumulating more spiritual information or chasing temporary transcendental experiences, the Jordan model calls for commitment to the full transformation process, willingness to release limiting identities, to submerge into unknown psycho-spiritual territory, to experience complete self-dissolution, and to emerge in renewed, expanded consciousness. The deepest contemplative traditions have always affirmed this truth, expressed through culturally specific metaphors, yet essentially congruent. The wasteland of shamanism, the Negredo of alchemy, the cross of Christian mysticism, the emptiness of Zen, all point to one realization: authentic transformation requires passage through symbolic death before true renewal can occur. Jesus' initiation at the Jordan stands as perhaps the Western tradition's most potent expression of this universal pattern, an enduring model for anyone willing to enter those same initiatory waters. As you integrate these understandings into your own path, consider that the transformation you seek may not primarily come through acquiring more knowledge, techniques, or experiences, but through willingness to release who you think you are, to submerge beyond familiar identity boundaries, and to allow something more essential and expansive to emerge. The Jordan's invitation is not to adopt new religious beliefs, but to implement a verifiable consciousness technology that Jesus exemplified, a transformation model as potent today as it was on the ancient river's banks. The practices offered are not mere spiritual exercises for improving your current condition, but technologies for facilitating transformation, as complete as that which turned a Galilean carpenter into a vessel of Christ consciousness. They are an invitation not merely to admire or worship Christ from afar, but to activate the same Christ consciousness within yourself through implementing this verifiable, initiatory, death and rebirth process. If these explorations have awakened something dormant within you, perhaps recognition of your own yearning for transformation that transcends incremental improvement, join our community of dedicated seekers, implementing these consciousness technologies in their lives. Each exploration reveals another facet of the immense human potential exemplified by Jesus' transformative journey. Your subscription supports this ongoing work of translating perennial wisdom into accessible formats for contemporary seekers. Together, we continue the work of reclaiming Christianity as a living initiatory tradition, reconnecting with transformative dimensions, often obscured by conventional religiosity, but accessible to anyone willing to enter the Jordan's initiatory waters.